It is approximately 5:30 p.m. Welcome to the Oviedo City Council CRA Governing Board meeting. We have all members of the CRA Board present. This time, our first order of business is approval of our minutes from July 17th, 2017. I'd like to entertain a motion to do so.
So moved. Second.
Motion second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to our second item of business, it is the 2017-18 Oviedo CRA budget. This time I will turn it over to Mr. Jones for explanation and introduction.
Thank you very much, Chairman Persampier, ladies and gentlemen of the Oviedo CRA Governing Board. This is a request for the CRA Governing Board to approve the Oviedo CRA budget for fiscal year 2017-2018. Some background information. The Oviedo CRA funds projects and programming through the use of tax increment funding, also known as TIF, TIF. TIF utilizes the increment tax that is generated through the change in valuation from the CRA base year to the current year. Any tax revenue from the City of Oviedo and Seminole County ad valorem taxes only that are generated based on that change in valuations on parcels within the CRA is placed in the tax increment fund. The tax increment fund has seen significant growth, positive growth since 2015, primarily due to the Oviedo on the Park project coming onto the tax rolls and being completed. The total funds available for fiscal year 2017 and 2018 are at this time $511,891. Pardon me. The use of funds in previous years primarily have been to secure the implementation of the Oviedo on the Park project, Oviedo on the Park being one of the strategic objectives identified in the Oviedo Community Redevelopment Plan. The Oviedo CRA has also utilized TIF revenue to pay for the operation and administration of the CRA and the utilization of city staff for CRA activities, particularly the Planning Department and Finance Department, as well as to repay the general funds for funds that were advanced to help operate the CRA prior to any TIF generation becoming positive. The proposed projects for the fiscal year 2017-2018 are based on projects recommended for consideration by the city department directors and based on discussions with the city manager and city staff. The following 7 projects are recommended for inclusion in the fiscal year 2017-2018 budget. Project 1, CRA Administration. Project 2, Financial Department Support Services. Project 3, Facade Grant Program. Project 4, implementation of Oviedo on the Park, specifically Center Lake Park. Objective 5, downtown master plan. Objective 6, support stormwater pond realignment improvements. And then Project 7, a reserve for contingencies of $891. At its July 17th, 2017 meeting, the CRA Governing Board expressed some concern regarding the use of the TIF fund for payment of the debt service costs for improvements for Oviedo on the Park Center Lake Park facility, and that would be item number 4 for $257,000. The concerns were that the use of these funds may not be in accordance with Chapter 163-370, Part 3, subsection B of the Florida statutes. We sat down and reviewed the statutes and the timing of the placement of the item in the CRP and also the timing of the adoption of the CRA plan, and also went back and listened to some of the special session budget hearing meetings that addressed this item. So to address each one of those different concerns that were identified, the first concern was that the timing and the use of the CRA funds for the projects was within 3 years of the adoption of the plan. The CRA plan was adopted in 2010, and the Center Lake Park improvements were in the city CIP in 2014. So that, satisfactorily addressed that concern. The second concern was that if the TIF funds were used for a project that was identified in the city CIP, was the item removed from the city CIP for 3 years prior to the use of the TIF funds? The Center Lake Park improvements were in the CIP last in 2014, and the use of the CIP, or the use of the TIF funds for the Center Lake improvements, is proposed for 2017. So that adequately addresses that concern. And then the third concern was were the TIF funds ever identified as a potential funding source for the proposed improvements? And we've attached a memo from a special budget session or special city council session from March 10th, 2014, where the debt service instrument was discussed and the use of TIF funds as a repayment mechanism were also discussed. So the use of TIF funds for servicing this debt instrument were considered and were identified as a potential funding source. So all three of the potential concerns with regards to being in accordance with Florida Statutes 163, 370, Part 3, subsection B, have been satisfactorily addressed. And you also have a memo from the city attorney, Ms. Cockcroft, that also addresses that as well. That being said, also at the July 17th meeting, the CRA Governing Board requested that city staff prepare a list of candidate projects from the city's capital improvement project that could be used as potential alternate projects, for the requested $257,000 of the Oviedo on the Park, Center Lake Park budget item. City staff identified several projects that were listed in the Community Redevelopment Plan and also in the CIP. And the CIP projects were determined to evaluate whether or not they would be eligible for TIF funding, and we identified 5 projects that were identified within the CIP and the redevelopment plan that are eligible also for TIF funding. These include the Regional Stormwater Pond, State Road 426, County Road 419 improvements, the Geneva Drive realignment, water infrastructure improvements, and the Boston Hill Park pedestrian crossing. The remaining projects that were identified in the CIP that are also in the CRA but were not listed in the CRA plan with the Wood Street extension, Oviedo Boulevard reclaimed water extension, and Oviedo Boulevard restriping could become eligible for CRA funding if they were incorporated into an update of the CRA plan and revision, and the CIP was revised to show the projects as being funded with TIF funding. So that's the alternate projects are available. The budget impact, the estimated 2017-2018 TIF increment that will be available for the CRA will be approximately $445,891, with unencumbered TIF funds of $66,000, enabling a total available funds of $511,891. There are sufficient funds to accommodate the proposed preliminary budget items with a remaining reserve of approximately $891. The proposed projects and activities are consistent with the redevelopment plan that has been adopted and the identified strategies, programs, and tasks. It is recommended that the CRA Governing Board adopt the CRA budget resolution for presentation and consideration by the Oviedo City Council for inclusion in its fiscal year 2017-2018 budget.
Thank you, John. Anything
Yes,
else?
sir.
Anything
No,
to
sir.
add? No. Mr. Cobb, anything to add?
No, sir.
All righty. We have everything here in front of us. Why don't we get a motion on the table of some sorts, and then we'll go into board discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve, what's the motion to,
I think it's just a 27.
budget resolution 10817. Is that the, it's recommended the CRA? Yeah, to approve the CRA FY 17-18 budget.
All right, so the
As
motion is
presented.
to adopt Resolution 108-17, which is the fiscal year 2017-18 city budget for the CRA, correct?
Correct.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we've got a motion to second, and Mr. Pollack, you've got the floor.
I've looked through this, and given the support that we were presented, that with the Center Lake Park and the $257,000, I feel like that was the intent based off of the support that we received, and so I'm okay with the budget as it's presented right now. I know that using CRA funds for the debt service may not be the most the best use of them, But to me, that's been the intent, to use those, so I'm okay with it. That's all I had.
Great, thank you, Bob. Member Sladek, you were the second.
I've got a question on lists. It sounds like Wood Street is not eligible to be included for funding because it was not on the list.
Yes, ma'am.
So was the funding of interest on the list 3 years ago or less?
The implementation of Oviedo on the Park was on the list. And so enabling the implementation of Oviedo on the Park was one of the primary redevelopment strategies identified in the plan.
Okay, so can you say that in a different way?
Certainly. There was funding that was required to enable the implementation of Oviedo on the Park.
And that was in 2010?
That was in 2014.
2014
Correct.
added to the plan to implement Oviedo on the Park, but by 2014, build the amphitheater had already rolled off the plan. Am I understanding correctly that that's the tweaky thing that happened that allows this to even be legally permissible?
You would have to repeat that.
It sounds like we were allowed to, so we funded not through the CRA the amphitheater and Oviedo on the Park to an extent.
Correct.
And then we removed that from the CIP because it was done. I don't fully understand the
Not
order
a
of
problem.
operations.
Not a problem. Brian, feel free to jump in if I get the timing wrong. There were certain infrastructure improvements that were approved through a bond issuance to implement the Oviedo on the Park, primarily infrastructure improvements and Center Lake Park area improvements. Then during that process, there was a shortfall identified where additional funds were needed to finish out the Oviedo on the Park improvements, the Center Lake Park improvements specifically. And so at that time, the city entered into or initiated a debt instrument where a portion of the funds raised from that debt issuance would be used for the Oviedo on the Park project. Only about 67% of the debt that was generated, or the revenues that were generated from that debt issuance, were actually used by the Oviedo on the Park project. So that's why the proportion of the debt repayment going back to it is only a portion of that.
All right, thank you. Well, in other comments on this, there's a couple of line items here that I'm iffy on the debt. Something about it looks like it's technically legally permissible. I just don't really like using that, which is a difference of opinion thing. But the other things that I'm kind of wondering about are the facade grant program. I'm inclined to reassign that to public art. There's been a lot of support for public art. I can't, off the top of my head, think of any facade in this area that might be into a matching grant at this time. So if we were to reassign that and this board were to agree, I think that would be a wise reallocation. And there's two other things on here that seem like we may be able to restructure and maybe free up some additional funding within the CRA budget to do something more visible. And those things are the CRA administration and downtown master plan. We just brought on a great assistant city manager, and we don't meet that often here. So it may be something that if we can bring that in-house and do that ourselves, I'd be interested in talking about that. And even the downtown master plan, it does need to be reworked, but paying $120,000 for it seems like a whole lot when we have sort of filled out the staff in-house and may be able to bring that inside too. So those are my thoughts on this.
Great, thank you. Dave?
I appreciate the staff's work in answering the question I brought up last time. I will say I still have some discomfort about the fuzziness of this $257,000 expenditure. The money was spent presumably in the third quarter of the 2014-2015 fiscal year. So from a pure perspective of timing, can we spend money today on Center Lake Park? The answer is, well, we can. But what we're doing is reaching back in time and paying for what was done when we were prohibited from spending the money. So it just gives me discomfort. So regardless of the thin line of the questions of legality, I have that discomfort. The other thing that I look at is that particular bond has payments that decrease slightly over time, but run for many, many, many more years. Today, this is over half of our proposed budget. I'd like us to do some visible new things, and I'm afraid if we agree this year, let's spend money on debt service, we're not doing something new. Nobody questions, was Center Lake Park an appropriate thing to do? Nobody questions, was it in the plan? But I'd like to see that money spent on some things that are physical, are visible, and are here now. I have no opinion as to what Megan said on public art, but I would ask the question, what does it take for us to add some of these other items to our plan so we at least have the opportunity to spend money on Wood Street, so we can spend money on some other things that are available. I guess you did identify we can spend money on a crosswalk. So things like that are visible, people will see today. Debt service for something we did 3 years ago seems like an unfortunate use of our funds, and I just don't want it to be a precedent going forward. That's it.
Tim?
I think the last time I voiced my displeasure for debt service as well, and part of my concern now will be that we have years to go to repay this debt, and so is this going to be a reoccurring line item in our budgets to come? And if so, that's probably even more distaste in my mouth. So even though it's legal, this CRA board did not vote to put itself in debt, and I don't believe that we have an obligation to make these payments. Now, the city obviously has this obligation. On a different note, what is in the stormwater line item? Specifically, what does that $69,000 go towards?
That $69,000 will be going to item 1 in your alternate projects list, the regional stormwater pond realignment.
Just to help
Yes, sir.
begin the
Yes, sir.
studies and the engineering?
The actual physical realignment of the pond. Yes, sir.
Obviously, that doesn't pay for any.
Not even close. It's a multi-million-dollar project.
Right.
All of the items listed under alternate projects are very large ticket items.
I like the idea that Megan had of bringing that downtown master plan in-house if we have the skills to do so. I don't know if Brian has the staff, but I certainly think $120,000 is quite a bit of money in this small budget. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Keith?
Brian, I guess, can we answer the question on that debt service? Is that going to be a reoccurring line item in the budget?
As far as today, I would have to say yes.
Now, I guess I should be clear, in the CRA budget or in the general fund budget?
It would be in the CRA budget. That would be our recommendation.
I kind of, these two guys down here are pretty smart guys, and I kind of agree with that logic that the city's got an obligation for, but it'd be nice if we could use that for something more useful. And I guess a procedural question is, how do we adjust this? Are we going to adjust this tonight? Do we have to take red pencil to the list and work it out, or when does the final vote come?
To amend your plan, that's a pretty involved process. Starts with y'all, goes to the city council, has public hearings. The plan amendment process will take a while.
The first step in the plan amendment process is that the CRA board would have to recommend that the plan be updated.
So this is a plan that we accept or don't accept?
No, what you have before you is a budget for the fiscal year.
Okay.
Mr. Britton, that's what we need to know tonight, is if you're willing to approve your budget.
Say that again?
What we need to know tonight is if you're willing to approve your budget for the next fiscal year.
Okay. Guess we have to.
Good. Steve?
Well, I kind of take a middle-of-the-road approach. Like, I agree that maybe not this big of a payment of debt service, but the CRA is what it is, and it has debt. And, Tim is right. I mean, we didn't create that. We didn't vote for it, but the CRA is the big catalyst to get the funds to do all these other projects. What I would like to see, like something like Wood Street jumps out at me, to have that other connection, things that people could see. So my recommendation would be to, I don't mind paying some debt service from it, but we can't just pay debt service and not have anything to show the citizens what we're doing. So like a Wood Street, John, do we know how much it is to do Wood Street?
I do not have that number in front of me at this time, no, sir.
I'd like to know how much something like that costs, and some of this striping and things that we can point right away.
Yes, sir.
Things that we can point to right away, that this is what the CRA board has directed. And, using all that money for debt service, I mean, we got to start showing people some projects completed. And I say take a little bit. I don't think that, it's unreasonable to pay some of the debt out of it, but we've got to balance this with projects and things that people can see. So, I mean, Wood Street, I'd like to see that, the price on that, and I'd like to see that maybe be like, one of the first big ones that we do. So, that's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Well, just a few points hearing everything being discussed. John,
Yes, sir.
in this budget year, it's $511,000. What's it projected to be the following budget year after that?
The following budget year could be anywhere up to $720,000, $800,000. The TIF fund is going up rapidly.
Right. And the year after that?
Yes, sir.
And the year after that?
Yes, sir.
Right. So this year, it is the debt service, which is principal and interest, by the way. I heard somebody say it was interest only. It is not interest only. It is principal and interest, and if I remember, it's
Yes, sir.
a 15-year note, 10-year note?
I will have to confirm that with Brian.
13 year. Correct.
I'm sorry?
Sure. 13 years.
Okay. All right. But it's principal and interest each year? Yes, sir, that's correct. Correct. All right. So let's just be clear about the facts. So in next year's budget, or the year after this one, I should say, it's conceivable that there could be an additional $300,000 or $400,000 for these items that we were discussing this evening.
Yes, sir.
All right. The CRA was always intended to pay for improvements within the CRA, and Oviedo on the Park is the biggest improvement and the biggest catalyst that enable us to have any funds to even have this board to have this discussion. Now, what that debt enabled us to do, and and I can understand not having the whole history of it, is the debt enabled us to build Oviedo on the Park and build all the amenities in Oviedo on the
Correct.
Park. Because the question at that time was, do we build a third of a park, if I remember
Correct.
correctly?
Correct.
Right? It was either the amphitheater or everything else, or, build a third of it.
Correct.
So, that's why the debt was incurred. The debt was incurred to build the park, to get Oviedo on the Park going the way it's been going, in order to be the catalyst for this very CRA. So, I mean, I can understand that it may seem to some that it's a thin line, but, you got to look at it in its totality, in my opinion. Yes, I think I mentioned this last time, as we all have. It would be nice if we could have things that we can point to and say, here's what your CRA is doing. That trail connector, I know we kind of all gave up on that a couple of 3 meetings ago, but, you want to talk about, again, just my opinion, a home run amongst all these other things. I mean, get those trail connectors from the north to the south. I mean, that would make it unique, a trail through the wetlands. But, again, those are discussions we'll have later as more money becomes available to us. But, Brian, there was also talk about, rewriting the plan in-house. I just seem to remember that being very technical and involved. Do we have the staff who could do that?
It would be difficult to bring it in-house for the city staff. As far as Mr. Jones has written many of those plans, so he has the technical expertise. Our planners in development services are more land planners than they are. They're not up to speed on what writing a CRA plan is involved, as Mr. Jones is. It's my understanding, and having worked with Mr. Jones on the original CR plan, it's a little bit more than just having a meeting and identifying projects and putting it in and basically creating a capital improvement program. That's not what it's involved in. There are certain statutory improvements that statutory requirements have to be fulfilled. Our staff, there would be a learning curve for our staff to do that. And also, the CRA is a separate body from the city. The staff doesn't serve the CRA.
Right.
It would have to be part of the interlocal agreement. We'd have to amend the interlocal agreement between the city and the CRA board to outline.
What's the phrase you're using right now?
Excuse me, Councilmember, I'll get you.
Oh, no, I didn't understand the phrase. He said
Okay.
a word in
Okay, go ahead.
the what agreement?
Interlocal
Oh,
agreement.
interlocal.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's an interlocal agreement between the CRA and the city as to how we work with each other. Right now, it's mainly finance. So we would need to look at that as well. But as far as what our staff's working on right now, I'm not really sure that we have, one, the expertise to do that plan without, having to go in. There would be a steep learning curve. And then, two, making sure that we don't put off the other things that we're already working on to do that as well.
All righty, well, let me take it a step further. As consideration, because if you add the two together, it's about 165. Has consideration have been given of looking at what it would cost us to hire let's just call it a CRA head, who has all this skill set?
We haven't looked at that now. If the board wanted us to look at it, we can.
Well, I can't obviously speak for the board, but I think it might be something that would be intriguing to see what that type of position is worth out in the public sector. And that way the board can make a decision on which way to go. And by no means am I trying to push Mr. Jones and his company out, because they've done yeoman's work on this all these years, but, perhaps if, the number came back less than what it is, and then we can give Mr. Jones and his group an opportunity, just, hey, we could bring somebody on, do it for this and X, and if you want to do it for less and stay with us, well, that's your choice.
Right.
But just let free market decide that. So, I may like to see that just personally, but I'll go back up and down the board one more time and we'll get some comments on everything. But that's all I have. So I'm going to go just up and down in order again, just to keep it simple. So we'll start with Bob, one more bite at the apple. Anything?
Sounds good, and I think your suggestion about going to the market and looking and combining those two to that $165,000, I think that's a great idea. So
Every now and again I have one.
I concur with that.
Megan?
How does this $10,000 for public art, which is in the plan, and switching that from facades to public artwork, could we sort of do some kind of consensus thing, or I amend my second or ask the initial motion maker if you'll amend approval to involve that, or are we not even that far along?
We have reviewed the community redevelopment plan to see if public art was identified as a potential redevelopment project, and it was not listed in the plan. So to accommodate that, we would have to amend the CRA plan to identify public art as one of its potential projects.
And how long of a process is that?
Usually it takes about 6 months to update the plan from beginning to end.
Wow.
That's
Okay.
why you do them every 5 years or so.
So that would be what the $120,000 thing is the updating
ma'am.
of the plan?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Well, that kind of is a stinker of a situation. All right.
You good?
I'm good.
Dave?
Mr. Cobb, just to touch on something Megan brought up earlier, CRA administration at $45,000, and she referenced you have a new assistant city manager. I guess the problem the city's facing tonight is the action of this board with respect to the 257 has impact on your budget.
Yes, sir.
Coming up next month hearings, right?
Yes. Actually, we have.
So
a
you
workshop next week.
have, and I just want to hear what you have to say to this. You have obviously a new expense this year, which is a assistant city manager. I understand it may dig into his duties, but can we move CRA administration in-house as part of a way to resolve that budget issue this year? Part of a way.
As far as, it's not really a new expense because the assistant city manager position was in last year's budget as well. So
Well,
it's not
I
really-
understand, but
it was already
we'd be
accounted for.
directing $45,000 of CRA funds into that salary, which, as I understood our interlocal agreement, we can agree to use city staff, we just have to pay for it.
Could be.
So it's just a question. My thought process is we could probably find a way to change the redevelopment plan relatively quickly if we chose to, but if we don't move some of these funds down to contingency, we can't spend any of it. Is it correct, Mr. Cobb? I think Wood Street was a $150,000 expense?
This is one of the things I was looking at. I'm glad you asked.
130, and
It's the program, in the CIP has it as 130,000.
130? Okay. I'm not sure procedurally how to do this, but my thought process is that we move 130 out of implementation for Oviedo on the Park and move it into reserve for contingencies. I think $891 out of $500,000 gives us no opportunity the rest of the year to do anything. So I'll rely on the chair to tell me when I could request that or ask to amend a motion, but we're just having discussion right now.
Yeah, let me go up and down one more time, and then I'll get back.
Sure.
Me?
Yep.
I'm looking at this, and I see 10,000 of our overall budget is something that's actually tangible, and that's too low, in my opinion. Yes, we're funding some stormwater engineering, that kind of stuff, but we can't point to anything in this budget, and we don't even have the facade grants in front of us. So I would like to see us either put it into some surplus or set aside some funds so we can do something tangible over the next year. Also, I know the train is way down the tracks when it comes to the budget, and I would just like to make sure that staff is on notice that we will not see any more debt service in next year's budgets or the future budgets. I would like us to spend our money on something within the CRA that is tangible and we can point to and have some successes.
Okay. Keith?
Tim said it pretty well, and I'll go along with that.
Steve?
Well, again, I agree with everything I've heard, but I still feel like, I'll just address a couple things. I don't think the assistant city manager who we've had, trying to get for quite a long time, Robin was filling it, but now we have Patrick. I mean, our staff is so lean, and I just can't see putting that on somebody in-house at the moment. There are so many other things here that people don't see that have to, Brian's doing this all by himself for a couple of years. He's got Patrick now. Patrick's doing some stuff, so that I like the way it is. I'm okay with taking a look at somebody doing this in-house, but I've always said, when we have somebody that's doing the job for such a long time and doing it very well, you can see if there's a big difference, public, private, but we outsource a lot of stuff and it seems to be working good. And when you have somebody with as much knowledge as John has, I don't know that we look that far. I mean, obviously, John, I think the reason it was brought up, not because there's any issue with you, was just they're trying to save money. I don't think the savings would be that good, and how do we get a guy that has your knowledge?
Understood.
So that's how I feel about that. But I can agree 100% with Tim. We have got to start showing some stuff in this CRA. We've had it now for 7 years. I know we had to let it build up. But, Wood Street I like because people can now, go into Oviedo on the Park, back out to 434. I like that project for like a first one. But I still think that we can't blow off all debt service from the CRA because, Oviedo on the Park, without that, there really is no CRA. So I think we got to take some of it. What portion of it, I don't know. I certainly think that is quite high, 257. I think was it Dave who said, let's move some of it out and get a nice project that we can point to. So, that's where I'm at.
Okay.
I realize we're all over the place, but that's what I think.
Oh, I think I can get some consensus going here. Well, and again, I'm just going to respectfully say that when I hear things like we need to spend money on tangible things, if what we created over there is intangible, I don't know what is. So that's pretty darn tangible, what you see at Oviedo on the Park. And yes, it was over budget, but the choices were made to complete it, rather than do it halfway, because then the criticism would have been we did it halfway. So, you're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't. But I see tens of thousands of people enjoying that facility on a weekly basis, so we certainly must have done something right. As far as that 257 that's in the CRA plan, it's very easy for this board to say, take it out and put it someplace else, but then the next meeting, your council has to have, something's getting cut somewhere in this city. So it's got to be made up. It doesn't matter where it comes from, but it's going to come from somewhere. So if it's this board's decision for this year not to let it ride out of here and then let this 511 become 700,000 or 800,000 next year, and then everything you're all asking for can be done, that's going to make it extremely tight around City Hall. And I'm not just sounding a horn here. Those of us who have been through the budget, who have seen the process, to make that up would be difficult this year because of bond funding from years ago that the city has, about 5 years left that we got to get through it? Right. That impact fees aren't making up for. And specifically, this building we're sitting in. Right? Public safety building, this building, Mitchell Hammock, right? Isn't it that whole little wraparound bond that you have, Jerry? It would be this building, public safety building, right, that we have 5 years left on?
There's a number.
Come on. No, that's okay. I caught you off guard. I'm trying to do it from memory myself.
I sincerely apologize. I'm not prepared to answer that question specifically right now, but over the next 5 years, there's a gradual de-escalation of the debt service until we get to fiscal year 2022. Mm-hmm. Once we get to fiscal year 2022, I believe our number drops about 800,000, Kelly, something to that effect. Okay. So what we've tried to do through the budget process this year and bringing in the CRA is we're trying to build a bridge to get to 2022. And we desperately need that. That's what we're looking for. And you're exactly right, Mr. Mayor. If we don't approve this tonight, there will definitely be cuts in the general fund in places that we'll have to look for.
And most of that, excuse me, all of that bond debt is 20 and 25-year-old stuff, if I remember.
Correct.
Parks, that's right. There was some parks in it. There was City Hall. There was the public safety building, and there was
Correct.
something else. Okay.
Yeah. 20, 25, 30 years. Right.
Eons ago.
Right.
That the impact fees were pledged for.
Correct.
And we're not getting nearly the amount of impact fees that we used to get. And
that is correct.
Even though everybody thinks we're booming and growing everywhere, they don't realize that we're really not in terms of impact fees. But that's what's creating the shortfall.
Correct. The revenue source that was used to pay the debt service is just as dried up. It's just not there this year.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Book? Thank you. All righty. So now with all of that information, do we still want to shift things around this year? Do we want to let this year ride and we will work towards next year as this increases, pinging off things that are on these lists?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a suggestion that I think
Help,
can solve two problems. I'm very uncomfortable with this expenditure on debt service. I think I heard other folks say they feel the same way. I'd like to at least have city staff know in preparing future budgets, let's find a way not to do this. But I see a way to let it ride this year and still have contingency to pay for Wood Street. And I'd like to turn that into, do you make a motion to amend a motion? How do you do
Sure.
it?
Why don't you ask for an amendment to the...
Okay.
Or just let us know what the idea is.
Okay, so my thought is, the facade grant program, no one's really applied. The downtown master plan can wait a year. We'd have $130,000 we can move to reserve for contingencies, move to revise the redevelopment plan to add Wood Street and do something concrete, and the facade grant program won't be missed, and we could start the downtown master plan in the next fiscal year. That's just my thought process.
And Dave, are you saying keep the 257 the way it is?
I don't like it, but leave it alone because of what pain you guys would have in the coming months. Well,
All right.
at the budget hearing. You have to cut something. We're
let me
not
see
here
it.
to try to make you cut something.
Let me see if there's consensus. Tim, could you buy into that one for this year?
I'm a little uncomfortable with delaying the downtown master plan, but if it solves our immediate crisis, I think that would be okay.
Dave, can I ask a follow-up question to help Tim? If we move this into contingency, and let's assume something happens with Wood Street or something else, and then we figure out a different way to do the downtown master plan, I would assume, since we have any contingency, John, that we could spend it somewhere
Yes, sir.
throughout the year on something else.
Yes, sir.
So,
Even better.
right, so if it's in contingency, I think what it's giving us is options.
My intent is to move the amount to recover Wood Street. It takes future action to do Wood Street.
Right, sure. It just, options are available. Keith, you okay with that?
I'm okay with it.
Steve?
Yes, good idea.
Megan?
Well, I'd like to see the Boston Hill pedestrian crossing happen this year, too. And I don't know what else we could shuffle, but if we were to do 25 towards CRA administration, maybe we could bring half of that in-house, have a little bit of partnership with our existing consultants, and figure out a way to make that work, and also get a very visible thing on 434. But I don't know if that's possible, how that would work with what needs to happen.
Brian, are we already set for the contract at $45,000 for Little John this year? Or SE, whatever you are?
No, sir. No, sir.
Not yet?
We basically, we bring that to you in September because the fiscal year begins in
All
October.
right. Can we possibly work with John Jones and his staff and see what we can do with that number to free up some money, as council member suggested?
We can work with Mr. Jones. Yes.
I appreciate that. That work?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Bob, how are you with this?
I'm good with that.
You know, can I just say one other thing?
Sure.
Mayor? You know, I mean, we got 23 more years coming, and as you pointed out, the money is going to grow. Like, right now, we're all trying to get so much and get some visible stuff, and I agree with Tim and Dave trying to get some stuff out there. I want to see some projects done, but, you know, let's not forget, you know, we still got 23 years, and John, as you would tell him, Mr. Mayor, before, next year, we got a couple 100,000 more, then more and more. We're going to be able to knock these off in the next couple of years, some of these projects. So, you know, maybe for this year, you know, our budget is, you know, was a little precarious. It's balanced now, and as Jerry said, so I think this is a good thing. But I like moving that money out. Gives us some flexibility for, you know, to do something this year, whatever it is, Boston Hill flyover or, you know, Wood Street, whatever. So this is good.
All righty, so let me ask the motioner and the seconder if we can amend the motion to adopt the fiscal year 2017-2018 CRA budget, which is resolution number 108-17, moving the dollars from the downtown master plan and the facade grant program into contingencies for the time being. Motioner agree?
Yes.
Seconder agree?
Yes, but I'd also like to move 20 from the CRA administration to reserve for contingencies, or straight up to Boston Hill pedestrian crossing. But that kind of is contingent on Mr. Jones's...
Yeah, why don't we tackle that one in September when they come back with the contract, and we'll see what we need to
Okay.
pay the contract, if that's okay.
That sounds good.
So you would agree to the...
Yes, I agree.
All righty, let me recap what's here, and if anybody disagrees with how I recap it, let me know. Looks like we have a motion on the table to adopt the budget. We're going to move 120 from the downtown master plan and 10,000 from the facade grant plan for the time being into contingencies. Other than that, we all agree on the budget as presented, and that would be Resolution 108-17. Did I wrap that up right for everyone before I call the motion? Call the question?
Do we need to specify that everybody does not want to use this budget for debt service in the future?
I don't think that needs to be part of the motion. That's,
Okay.
I think,
It's already said, though. Okay.
yeah, that's been stated.
Gotcha.
The motion is just on the budget. All righty, so, all in favor of the amended motion as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Jones, what else you got for us?
Very good. We have the upcoming meeting schedule for the remainder of 2017, September 18th at 5:30 p.m. and November 20th at 5:30 p.m.
With that, are we adjourned?
Yes, we are, sir.
All righty.